I have one word to describe my emotion in response to your testimony this morning, and that's hallelujah. I've been here just 1 year, but I've not heard anybody else come up here and talk about one of the fundamental problems of this body, and you have today, and I want to echo that. Our committee structure is just never going to work. It's not conducive with good stewardship of these issues. There are a lot of reasons why. I know I've gone back to 46, looked at 76, all the things in between in terms of how we got here. But when one senator, and look at this committee, I would argue that this topic right here, it addresses indirectly the #1 crisis our country faces. It really does. These are all well-meaning men and women here on both sides of the aisle. And here we sit because they're at another committee at this very moment that they deemed was as important today. I have 3 myself at 10 o'clock. We all do, 10 o'clock this morning. This can't continue. It doesn't work. It will never work. The second thing, Dr. Posner, I know you've written several things, and I look forward to hopefully working with you and some of your organization about how to change this process. But I have a quick question, and that is, when you look at a budget, and I know Senator Kane and King and others have governors' experience. I come from business where you look at the entire budget, and yet we spend $3.7 trillion as a federal government, but we deal with $1.1 trillion in this committee. That's the first issue. So the question I have is, how do you respond to my observation that, hey, wait a minute, why aren't we talking about all of it? My argument is, heretofore, when they were trust funds for Medicare and Social Security, I get it because they take care of themselves. Now they're not taking care of themselves, and we have line items on our budget that are supplementing both of those entities. So I would argue that gives us purview to bring all of the above spending into this committee. The second question that ties in with that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. First of all, the current process, I said with the other panel, it's set up for failure. Number one, it's a budget resolution, as Senator Whitehouse has said. The majority can cram down the throat of the minority any budget they want, and it's a political statement. We all know that. Even last year, this budget we produced was mostly a political statement. We crammed it down the throat of the minority, didn't get one vote. And then we go to authorization and we find out, well, okay, some of those can get authorized, some can't. But we get to appropriation, now we really see the problem. We can appropriate in committee, but the minority leadership has no incentive, Republican or Democrat, to ever let one of those appropriation bills get to the floor of the Senate. Why? Because the minority can drive an omnibus formula where they will get most of what they want. And guess what happens as a part of that process? We all spend more. Now, whether we think it's justified or not, that's the equation. It will never work. I've been sitting here for a year. I've been looking at it for 3 years, trying to figure out how well-intentioned, intelligent people end up spending money like we're spending, and now I get it. It's the process. And I applaud the chairman and the ranking member, and I know Senator Whitehouse and Senator King have spoken out on this, among others. But I'd love to get your thought about what keeps us from bringing all that in, and then isn't it time that we throw the 74 Act out and take a start at this from a clean page perspective? I'd like to get you and Dr. Thurber on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's an important question because we now focus on 30% of the total.
Exactly.
And we need to have regular ways to bring them all together, which is why I suggested this portfolio approach. You'd bring the whole thing together regardless of the character.
But that would include mandatory as well as discretionary.
Mandatory as discretionary and tax expenditures. I mean, part of this process is that this committee legislates the whole, and we haven't, and sometimes it's at tension with the parts, so it's very tempting to articulate symbolic 302As that are completely incapable of ever being implemented. And I think that's why having a leadership, presence on this committee might help temper that process, to introduce a note of, bringing more players into the process of formulating the whole might help the whole be more realistic and more grounded. Because frequently, and this has happened all throughout the first decade, the last decade, and now, those targets can veer from reality and create a mess at the end of the process, which is what they're designed to prevent. Obviously, we have some other questions that we're starting to look at in this task force about how you budget for entitlements. Can we bring them into play more regularly? You don't put a cap and do them every year, but can there be meaningful targets that are adjusted every 5 years with some points of order around it? And we're kind of developing some papers on that right now, and I think it's worth a lot of thought.
Dr. Thurber?
A couple of comments. One, on an earlier comment that you made about the committee system, I want to remind you that there are 109 committees and subcommittees dealing with Homeland Security. There are 58 dealing with energy and environment. One of the toughest things that you can do is to realign jurisdictions. It's like playing Monopoly, and the chair of Appropriations and Finance have Boardwalk and Park Place. They don't want to give things up. So that's a very difficult thing. It needs to be done because, back to the other point of program duplication, it stems to a great extent from all of these jurisdictions on the Hill on these programs that are decentralized, and it's not the executive branch doing it, it's various committees and subcommittees. In terms of...
But therein lies the dysfunction in the federal government, in my mind. I mean, I understand the balance of powers between the branches, but we see the rise of the regulatory side right now that doesn't have that encumbrance. They're much more productive in producing rules that have a dramatic impact on our lives, whereas we get stumped here trying to fight through this maze to get any change. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
when you have gridlock on the Hill, you're going to shift power, in my opinion, to the executive branch.
That's what we've done. That's what Senator Whitehouse said, and I agree.
Promulgating rules and regulations, but also control of the budget. In terms of Paul's recommendation of putting leadership, Ways and Means, and Appropriations on this committee, you know the House has done that. Early in the game, the House was highly partisan at the very beginning. Because of that, the leadership was on that committee really battling, but I think it's a good idea now to have that representation on this committee to try to bring people together here before you go forward with a resolution.
Thank you. Thank you.